Kia ora. Hello. This week, we're going to look in at the guilds again. Previously, we have looked at the positions of apprentices, journeymen, masters, and how they interacted, as well as women in the guilds. This week, we are going to discuss what the guilds did and how they influenced society. The guilds are often ill-defined. We know they existed, but their purpose is not often discussed. I'm going to do my best to cover what they did here in this episode. I say that because we'll again be condensing a few hundred years of history across Europe into a very short video. What this will allow us to do is give a great overview for more in-depth videos later on when we tackle more complex subjects. I'm Andrew, and this is Populaurbanum, a channel where we discuss reenactment and the medieval middle class. The guilds had many different aims within medieval society. They were originally set up as mutual aid societies, founded on the principles of the confraternities, in which merchants and craftsmen would band together to protect each other and their trade. As the guilds matured, their objectives changed. To understand how the guilds operate, we need to examine the guilds as two separate entities. One as an economic structure concerned with the management of trade, and the other as a social organization concerned with the management of the conditions of its members and the society in which it operated. Sometimes these concerns overlap. For the ease of discussion, and so we can provide a video that is under 20 minutes long, I'm going to first discuss the economic aims of the guilds and then its social aims. As the guilds were a corporate confraternity, the first and most important function of the guilds was to provide a stable income for its members. There was many ways the guilds were able to control costs. Primarily, the guilds wanted to ensure the products that they were producing were of the highest quality and regulating the processes of production. One way was by having in place a system of formal training, such as the apprenticing system. This ensured that its workers were skilled. Another was through the process of regulation, and boy, did they regulate. Dyers could not use too little dye stuffs. Weavers had rules regarding what types of fibers were to be used in which textile. Food vendors had rules for the ways food was displayed and prepared. Goldsmiths could not sell gilded wares. In York, in 1307, girdlers were forbidden to work during the night or to work outside their master's house. Leather could only be bought from the city tanners, and any other thing they needed from his fellow citizens. All goods that were produced were checked and measured. Statutes were put in place to ensure that only high-quality products were created. Statutes were created to ensure that items were manufactured to standard. Fines were levied if items were defective or poor. If counterfeit or substandard goods were traded, punishments could result in fines all the way to expulsion from the guild or exile from the city. In London, the Pewter Guild Ordinance of 1348 states, "So many persons make vessels not in due manner to the damage of the people and the scandal of the trade, that 3 or 4 of the most true and cunning of the guild should be chosen to oversee the alloys and the workmanship of all. Be it understood that all manner of vessels should be made of fine pewter with the proper portion of copper to tin, that no one of the guild shall in secret places make vessels of lead or of false alloy to sell out of the city at fairs or markets to the scandal of the city and the damage of the good folk of the guild. And if anyone is found carrying such wares to the fairs and markets or anywhere else in England, for the first default let them lose the materials so wrought. Upon the second default let them lose the materials and suffer punishment at the discretion of the mayor and the alderman. And if the third time shall they be found offending, let them forswear the guild for evermore." This is important because the London pewterers had developed a way to make high-quality, lead-free pewter, which was now all the rage in the rest of Europe. But this was difficult to make, so the guild had to ensure that they were protecting their product and their reputation by ensuring no members of the guild would go about trying to make a quick dollar and make pewterware with lead content. Now, before I go on to the next section, I need to issue a correction. Past me made a mistake. I had stated that the guilds held a monopoly. This was wrong. During my research, my understanding of topics will change, and so will my opinions. I will do my best to correct myself as we go along. While the guilds did engage in monopolistic practices, overall what the guilds held was a monopsony, which is where instead of having one seller controlling the market, there is only one buyer doing the same for each trade. The guilds held the monopsony on both the labour market and the supply of goods. This helped the guilds maintain stable incomes. The process of quality control allowed the guilds to exclude people who did not meet their standards of skills. This kept the labour pool to the people that they wanted to employ. Essentially exclusionism to keep wages low and beat competition. Other ways to keep unwanted competition out of the market, the guilds limited entry into masterhood. The guilds also aided in keeping the cost of operations down by setting of maximum wages. The guilds also wanted to maintain the fair operating field for its members, where no one member would have an unfair advantage over another. They prohibited the use of slave labour outside of domestic duties and prohibited the number of apprentices. Members were unable to solicit business from another member. No member could attract business from another shop or stall by calling or spruiking from across the street. Signage had to remain fair and organised. If a journeyman could start his own business and clients from his former master's business came his clientele, he might have to supply proof that he did not steal them, otherwise suffer fines or exile. The merchant guilds enforced contracts both within the guild and outside, applying political and financial pressures to ensure that contracts were met. Weights and measures were standardized and controlled. They strictly controlled the way money was handled. Merchant guilds also regulated the lending of money as to remain transparent and avoid punishment by the church for usury. The benefit of the merchant guilds is that they were able to protect against predatory rulers, traders who could threaten to leave collectively in case of material or personal injury. This encouraged their host to provide protection and reasonable trade agreements. The guilds also engaged in price fixing, sometimes at both ends of the production line, either in the bulk purchasing of raw materials and then distributing it to members at a set price. Then again, at the final point of sale to either merchants or to consumers. Overall, this was to create a level playing field where the members were in a state of non-competition with each other. The guilds were not just interested in business, however. They were, after all, a fraternal order. They protected the members of the guild and the community. The guild was also concerned about its members' moral fibre and the standing of the guild in the community. Many guilds were formed not around the corporate ideal, but the religious ideal. The guild served as a way for its members to collectivize their salvation. They still had their roots in the confraternities after all. A guild would have a chapel and patron saint associated with the organization. Members would attend mass together on Sundays and attend church during other times of the week. Members not only had to adhere to strict statutes for production, but also behaviour. Failure to attend church or services could result in fines. In 1388 in Norwich, members of the Peltiers Guild were charged with £3 of wax if they missed masses held on mornings after guild's feasts. Tailors charged £0.50 for the same, and £2 of wax to members who missed the day of prayers for the souls of brothers and sisters of the guild. Members were not to play dice or engage in fraud, and theft was strictly forbidden. Mutual aid societies were funded and created by the guilds to assist the poor, usually to help poor guildsmen or almoners. This could be in the form of food, clothing for the poor or sick. Pensions or rents and even dowries for poor girls were funded. This was financed by fines and charitable collections from members. Collections and donations were made to the church for the purchasing of candles. The 1418 statutes of the London Drapers Guild stipulated that freemen who had been members of the company for 7 years and hath been of good name and fame were entitled to assistance of 13 shillings and 4 pennies annually if they fell into poverty, impotency or sickness, while former wardens would receive 14 pennies weekly. The guild built and funded almshouses either for the members of the urban poor, and they offered urban charity, where they fed and clothed the poor. All this was to ensure its members could have as much buying power in prayer as the wealthy. By collectivizing their wealth, the guilds were able to carry out great works, where a single member would not have the capacity to. The medieval person was concerned at most for their immortal soul. For them, good works and charity was the greatest way to ensure their soul into heaven. Guilds often employed chaplains to minister and pray for them. Since the medieval person believed that a priest could intervene directly with God, numerous masses were held, both for the living and especially the dead, to ensure a speedy ascension to heaven. I would not say there was ever a coherent objective. The guilds were never set up in a coherent fashion with the goal to address. These aims, much like the guilds, developed over the centuries to respond to the political and economic conditions in which they operated. The guilds were creating markets, laws, statutes, and system of economics which still exist today. This was only so they could better conduct their businesses. While before I've said the guilds did not spring up suddenly, at the same time it is as if they did. They were not planned, and the laws and society in which they operated had no response to them. While they existed, the guilds were a palpable economic and social force. They were responsible for the innovation of modern trade, and the systems which they created were eventually adopted into modern commerce. Additionally, the guilds also were responsible for the birth of the modern state and our modern ideas. But, as I have said before, this is a topic for another time. Oh, I didn't see you there. That must mean you must have enjoyed the video. So, why don't you like, comment, and subscribe? And remember, stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.